way. We were saying that when I was here, there were only like 30 Chinese kids. There's like a handful of families. And now there are 400 at that school, and then all of us being more violent. So over the next 27 years, the prospects of this country becoming much more racially conflicted, very, very high. And one thing I said to a group of Asians at Harvard a couple months ago, we're probably one generation away from what happened to the synagogue in Pittsburgh happening to an Asian community. Because if you look at who's being cast as the enemy or the boogeyman or the rival, it's China, if you look at it. And we know most Americans do not distinguish very much between Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. You know, they look at us and are like, they don't really check. You know what I mean? And so Asian Americans have historically sat out politics. Some people here accept it. Like HP, I know, has been very politically active as part of a Papa and Ting Ting and then some other people as well. But Asian Americans globally, we vote at lower levels, we contribute at lower levels, we sit it out, like we run for office less. we generally are not that engaged with politics. And what I suggest is that most Asian Americans are like, look, I just gotta like make a great life for myself, my family, my kids, and as long as you keep my taxes non-ridiculous, like I'm on board and I'm just gonna like make it happen. And I'm going to say that that time is up for us. Like that we need to get with a program and start getting engaged politically and start having a real voice, commensurate to the fact that we are 5.8% of the US population. We are overdue. And if we don't get active and activated soon, fast, we're going to end up on the receiving end of a really, really nasty rise in racism that's going to take place over this next 27 years. So my running for president, I believe, can help wake Americans up to the fact that the elephant in the room is technology, it's not immigrants. But also it can wake people up to the fact that Asian Americans are just as American as anyone else. That we are just as smart, just as innovative, just as patriotic, we love our children just as much, and we are willing to fight for a vision of this country that will include us and everyone else in this country and build a better way of life. Not just for people that happen to have like lots of degrees in education, but for the people that are at home caring for their kids, for the people that used to have jobs that got replaced by AI and software. But we have to fight for this vision of the country as fast as we can, because we do not have unlimited time. So this is the rationale for my running for president, and I'll tell you guys, I've been shocked at how well I can do. I can legitimately compete and win for the White House. And Zach has been with me to Iowa. How many times have you been? 4 times. The Iowans, how many of you have seen the video of me speaking to 1,000 Iowans? It's on YouTube, like a bunch of you. So you saw that. And then I gave another one of those over the holidays, and I'm going back. Iowa's like my second home at this point. Let me think. If Schenectady is like my, Iowa's like my 3rd home. So I'm going to spend a week, a month in Iowa, and Iowa's a magical place where nothing matters except your being there and spending time with the people. Iowans don't care about mainstream media, they barely read that stuff. And they insist on meeting you in person before they vote for you. Because they have this serious responsibility they know as the first state to vote. So then they say, like, I'm not going to vote for anyone unless I meet them. Some of them say, I'm not going to vote for anyone unless they've been in my home. And there are 99 counties in Iowa, so it's like the great equalizer. You have no choice but to go there, drive around, and meet people. And so one of them told me, like, this might be too far, but one of them said to me, it's like, it's like you can tell if someone's crazy after about a minute. And they said, I've been with you for 15 minutes, like, not crazy at all. That was great. Who knew that was a competitive advantage in US politics? So if you go where the rubber hits the road, I can compete and win, but I need your help to do so. I need Asian Americans to help get me on the debate stage in June of this year, which is only in 5 months. And I need Asian Americans to get behind me at a level where I have the resources to compete in Iowa and New Hampshire. Because even though I don't need to match the other candidates dollar for dollar, but I still need to raise at least like a certain amount of money to be able to compete credibly. And that's why people like you are so important. That's why I'm so grateful to you for your support. Just want to thank you all for being here tonight. Let's make history together in 2019. We'd love to take some questions from you all, because I think we have some time before dinner gets started. Thank you so much.
Your position to support Taiwan's future as an independent or democratic country?
Sure. So my parents live in Taiwan now. I went to Taiwan about once a year before my older son was born, spent a lot of time there. I think that the current status quo is working quite well for both countries, because Taiwan is functionally independent in terms of its governance. And so to me, maintaining the status quo would be ideal for both sides. There was a period when Taiwan was the #1 investor in China when the economy was still developing. So both sides have really benefited a lot.
But the status quo, how long that status quo will last? Because eventually that status quo has to be broken.
Well, I mean, the status quo has been in effect de facto for decades now, so I'm not sure there is some imperative that the status quo is going to change one way or another. And there are obviously different ways it could change. And so to me, the best way forward would be to maintain the status quo, because I think it functionally carries most of the benefits that you want to see for both sides. But you should know, like, I have a lot of natural affection and love for Taiwan because my family's there and I spent a lot of time there.
Of action.
Well, I have to say, these are the hardest questions I've ever received. No, they're good questions. It's like very, very like down the middle in terms of the Asian American community. So I'm pro-affirmative action. I think that Asian Americans are getting used as a wedge on this issue. Like if you look at who sued Harvard, for example, it's not even an Asian group. It was like a conservative group that first sued University of Texas, and when that didn't work, they decided to sue Harvard. Then they sort of got Asians into it, saying like, look, like, you know, you guys are the ones that are suffering. That, to me, Asian Americans have a unique voice in this and a role to play. And I think that affirmative action has benefited many people. Like, it benefits different parts of the Asian American community even now. You know, maybe some of the groups that are somewhat underrepresented, like it's like the Bangladeshi community, like other people that are not necessarily situated to succeed as much out of the box. So I'm pro-affirmative action. I know there are many Asian Americans who feel differently about that. But I would say that if Asian Americans Asian Americans define like our own interest more broadly, then I think it's better for our community overall than if we get down and say like, I'm gonna fight for like every last slot in these institutions. My wife went to a high school called Stuyvesant in New York, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with. But Stuyvesant is majority Asian because it's like pure testing. And so she has particular feelings and emotions about this too. That like there are also my parents met at Berkeley, and like you know there's like the UC system. like there are different schools that serve different ends. And so if some institutions want to exercise some sort of policy, I think they should be able to do so.
Alright, so I work for GE Research, I work in technology, I work on AI. Actually working on some technology and automating the manufacturing shop, right? Like get rid of people. So using the AI computer to do more things. To me, the technology is the future. So how would you, if you think a technology is the elephant in the room, how would you, what's your solution?
Oh yeah. So, oops. Whoa, I'm scratching. Almost got him.
Yeah.
So, I am very pro-progress, pro-technology, pro-innovation. I'm a serial entrepreneur. And I was just when I was in Iowa like 2 weeks ago, I was talking to some union workers, and they said, look, we had 6 welders, and then we got a welding robot, and then we fired 5 welders, and then the 6th welder now just makes sure the robot's doing okay. It doesn't even weld, just like sort of ministers to the robot. So then they know that it's technology that's coming down the pike. One of the examples, like thought exercise I use, is we're about to potentially displace hundreds of thousands of truckers. Trucking is a very bad job for your health. It's actually very unhealthy to sit in a truck 11 hours a day, like crisscrossing the country. 80% of truckers have diabetes or obesity or like some kind of like chronic marker of like disease. And so there's a parallel universe where we would be celebrating the truckers' liberation, where we were like, guess what, great news, your truck drives itself. And he was like, fantastic, and he comes out. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, because the truckers make $46,000 a year right now, and they might make 0 or close to 0, like if the truck drives itself. So I am very pro the work you're doing, and one of the things I say in my book is that if you're an inventor, you have a tough job just inventing. It is not your job to figure out all the downstream economic and social impacts of your invention. That's like impossible. It would be an impossible burden for you. The people whose job it is to figure out what happens to those workers is our government, our leaders, and our policymakers, but they're just way, way behind the times. So we need to get them up to now, and then you should just be able to just do the work you're doing as fast as you can. Election Day national holiday, so that hopefully was there, because it's crazy to me that, like, you know, millions of Americans can't vote because they just can't get off work that day and they have a shift and they can't miss the shift, and et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of issues around our voting right now. Having the day off would be a huge start. I'm also for making tax day a national holiday because we need to invert the fact that tax day right now is just super miserable and we all hate it. And then we need to like try to create a better relationship with our government. But the archaic nature of voting right now, to me, is really something that, and the wild thing is right now, some people are saying like we have to stick with the old voting machines because it's actually harder to tamper with them. It's harder to game them than it would be software and whatnot. But I have friends who are working on a blockchain-based voting solution, and it's technologically almost ready for prime time. And so if you can imagine a world where instead of having to like register and vote and all this stuff, you like bust out your smartphone and just say like this person, that person, that would be a game changer for democracy, and that's why I'm pushing that. And also because my techie friends tell me that it's feasible technologically. But I agree with you that there are like half a dozen things we should be doing. We need to try and get rid of these strange rules that are disenfranchising African American voters and others in other parts of the country. We need to give people the day off. We need to publicly fund election campaigns. So getting money out of politics would be so great. And what I say to people is that no sane politician loves calling rich people and asking them for money all day. Like, and so why can the politicians not get together and say, hey guys, like we need to come with a better financing mechanism than this, than have these elections that are bought and sold by the richest set of Americans. So there's a whole set of changes we need to make. I just put that one down because it was top of mind. Thank you.
Basically, one of the best things that I learned today. And second is, are you really going to give $1,000 to Donald Trump?
If he signs up for the freedom dividend, I will.
More seriously, you know, why not you know, give $1,000 to people whose income is, you know, below a certain, you know
yes.
amount?
Yep. Which is a different form of solution to this, and I would be very much for a negative income tax. I prefer a universal basic income to a negative income tax because then it destigmatizes it, it universalizes it, and it makes it so it's not like a rich to poor transfer. A negative income tax is essentially, hey, I'm rich, you're poor, like you're gonna get money, I'm not. And then it still ends up building up barriers between those two groups. Whereas if you universalize it, then you say, look, we're all citizens, we're all owners and shareholders of this great country, we all get a dividend, I get it, you get it. And there aren't so many rich people that it ends up changing the numbers that much. So we shouldn't really worry about, you know, Donald Trump getting $1,000 a month if he wants it. I'm sure he would take it too, because that guy just loves money so much. He's like Scrooge McDuck. He just have like a, you know, vault of coins to like swim in. And the other thing is that if you fund it through a value-added tax, which is the way I'm suggesting funding it, then if you're at the top of the society, you're going to end up paying much more into the system than $1,000 a month anyway.
You mentioned a few factors for the 2016 Donald Trump victory. I think one of the most important factors is the misinformation of the social media, which Facebook and also, I mean, for Chinese Americans, especially the people from mainland China, we use the so-called WeChat.
WeChat, yeah.
It is a big problem of, I mean, there's so many fake stories, and I don't know what's behind them. You know, there's no ads. I just wanted to, you know, comment on that.
Yeah, so if you see the stories about what Russia did in the last election, it is mind-blowing. Like, they legitimately just invested in trying to build up very, very vocal tribes of different types of Americans just to try and foment divisiveness. And they're still at it right now. Like, they're still just going at it. WeChat, I'm sure, has its own set of problems. And so right now we're at a point where we're still benefiting from virality and like just spreading the word. But if I become the nominee, then what you're describing is going to be a fundamental problem. And I'm happy to say that the folks at Facebook and the other tech platforms are freaking out about this, and they're trying very, very hard to get their arms around it and tamp it out, to the point where even our ads and whatnot, like half of them are getting disallowed, even though they're just completely innocuous, because like anything that seems problematic, Facebook's now stamping out. Facebook now has woken up to the fact that this is a possible existential threat. If you talk to Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and these other guys, they will tell you that there is one existential threat to their business, and it is the US government. They know that. So now they're freaking out about trying to do something about it, so it's not as much of an issue. I will say too that apparently there are a lot of WeChat fans of mine. Like I get recognized on the subway, like people just bust out the WeChat and I did a video. So we may be in more position to benefit from some of that stuff than some other candidates, I think. And we're investing in WeChat, you should know, starting this week. We're going to start trying to build my WeChat game.
I guess the problem is really well said, well put, and I definitely, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. No, I think that the problem is, I think you put it really well. Just thinking from the solution perspective, you know, why policy? Why is policy, you know, you came from the private sector, I'm just interested in why you think, you know, the government is really the best way to affect this sort of change. I mean, it's a ginormous change, and really there are only two tracks to take. One, you either protect these top 4 or 5 jobs, right, manufacturing, retail, etc. So you either protect those jobs, or you fund more programs like coding for rednecks, etc. So I'm curious as to, one, which track you would take, and then the second question is, especially let's take the case of coal mining, right? I mean, it's not just a job for these families, it's a culture that's really ingrained. How do you see yourself dealing with those issues?
Yes. So I think what you just said about, hey, you either protect the current jobs or you start trying to invest in these new activities is right. And when I talk to truck drivers, what they say is we need to make robot trucks illegal. That's like their answer. And then you say like, well, there would actually be many, I mean, like, do I say this to the truckers? I think I did say this to the truckers. Is there many, many savings to automating truck? It's better for the environment, you use less fuel, you use trucks like 24 hours instead of just like 12 hours a day. It would save thousands of American lives because 4,000 people die in accidents with truck drivers every year. So just trying to freeze time is to me like not an answer. And it also would be impossible, even if you tried to. There is no way to preserve the retail jobs, as an example, unless you literally just say like, hey, I'm going to outlaw e-commerce and then make it so everyone has to go to the mall again. Like, it's not doable. So to me, we need to start investing as much as we can in the new alternatives. We don't have a choice. One of the reasons why politicians don't want to touch this is because it's very difficult and it seems very rising all the time. And so that's where we need to head. Now, to your question about identity being baked into it, a lot of Americans, so most Americans want to work and like want work that makes them feel valued. The form of work, in my experience, they're not as attached to. It's like, they become very good at a certain thing, but like if you give them something else they'd be good at, they would be fine with that. And so that is the fundamental challenge of this era, to find more forms of work that Americans would enjoy doing and feel valued for. And that's a generational challenge that we need to tackle. And so it's one reason why I want to create new economic measurements and make it so that different activities could then drive value. So if you used to drive a truck, and then you go home now and you repair your neighbor's boiler, or you give someone a ride, or you volunteer in your local community. Being here tonight at this restaurant, there's so much warmth and camaraderie, and it's like the best of this campaign where running for president, you end up meeting a lot of people, you end up making a lot of new friends. But this campaign has attracted the very best people I've ever met. And you all are very much cut from that cloth, so thank you all for being here. So to give a little bit of a sense about me and running for president, like when you first found out about this Chinese-American man who's running for president, you thought like, wow, that's new, it's interesting, like, you know, what sort of prospects does he have? And then you, hopefully after you spend some time with me in the campaign, you realize that I'm actually very reasonable, like not crazy, and just trying to solve some of the biggest problems of this time. So unfortunately, the problems that are built up in this country are just getting more and more extreme. And the manifestation of it to me was Donald Trump's victory in 2016. I know some of you, not active politically, some of you might have supported Donald Trump, some of you don't like him. But to me, his election was a sign of just how bad things were getting in many parts of the country, that there was a real desperation for some kind of change up from what our current government systems. That many Americans have lost faith and confidence in their government and were willing to take a chance on Donald Trump because they just wanted someone new and radical from outside the system. Now, I'll give you just a very quick sense of what I've done. So I went to Phillips Exeter, then I went to Brown, and then I went to Columbia Law School and was a corporate lawyer for 5 unhappy months. Sorry if any lawyers in this room. Any lawyers? Doesn't seem like it. Oh, one over there. So I was an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 months, and then I quit to start a .com business. That did not work out. It had its mini rise and maximum fall. And then I worked at a healthcare software company for 4 years, and then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So at that point, I started an organization called Venture for America because I had this sinking feeling that America's talent was getting concentrated in Wall Street and Silicon Valley, and not enough of it was heading across the country to places like Schenectady or Rochester or Detroit or Cincinnati or Baltimore or Cleveland. And so I started Venture for America. I donated $120,000 of my own money, and then started calling rich friends asking, do you love America? And then some of them were unwise enough to say yes. They said yes. They joined my board, donated $10,000. Our budget that first year was about $250,000. This year, Venture for America's budget's between $6 and $7 million. Thousands of applicants, hundreds of graduates. We've helped create several thousand jobs around the country. So during that time, I was appointed by the Obama administration as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship. I got to introduce my wife to the president, so that was fun. I got to go to the White House. You could bring one person with you. And I was the only person who brought my significant other. It was the most confusing thing. Everyone was like, here's my comms person, here's my chief of staff. And I was like, here's my wife. Oh, the rest of you guys are going to stay married. And then my in-laws liked me a lot more for like a week. So I had this arc with Venture for America where a movie was made about us. It's now on Netflix. If you want to watch it with your kids, it's generally kid-friendly. It's called Generation Startup. It's about young entrepreneurs trying to start businesses in Detroit. So I have an IMDb credit as myself. I wrote a book, received these awards, and then over the 7 years I was traveling the Midwest and the South, I was staggered by how beleaguered most of the country feels. And I don't know if you've traveled to some of these places recently, but they are not thriving at all. And then Donald Trump becomes president, and then I think, wow, like the problems have grown to this point, and they're about to unfortunately get a lot worse because of technology, artificial intelligence, software, and robotics. So, so this is going to be interesting because we all, frankly, are not normal Americans by most standards. So only 32% of Americans graduate from college, to give you a sense. So 68% are high school graduates or have 1 year of college. So I'm going to ask you all just to volunteer. What do you all think the most common jobs in the United States are, by category? Like, what do Americans actually do for a living? So someone said truck driver, and that's right. Number 4 is truck driving. It's the most common job in 29 states. Yeah?
Administration?
Yeah, administration and clerical work, which includes call center workers. That's number 1. So number 1 is administrative and clerical. Number 4 is truck driving. What are 2 and 3?
Sales clerk.
Sales clerk is number 2. That's retail and sales. 1 in 10 American workers works in retail. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman with a high school degree making between $11 and $12 an hour. What's number 3? I'll give you a hint. We're sort of standing in it, or sitting in it.
Restaurant.
Hospitality.
Food service and food preparation is number 3. That includes the hundreds of thousands of fast food workers. Number 4 is truck driving and transportation, and number 5 is manufacturing. So I'm just going to go through that really quickly, because I can sense it's a very smart group. Administrative and clerical, retail and sales, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. What percentage of Americans do you think work in one of those 5 categories? It's half. It's 49%. The average person in these categories is a high school grad making between $14 and $15 an hour. So if you look at these 5 job categories, you know they're going to shrink a ton. Like, how many of you saw the recent AI demonstration that Google put out where they can make appointments for you and essentially like work as your customer service, like a bunch of you? There are 2.5 million Americans still working as call center workers, making $14 an hour. How long do you think it's going to be before AI can do that job?
2 years?
2 years, 10 years, somewhere between 2 and 10 years. Probably closer to 2, honestly, because that's like a fairly process-oriented job. 30% of American malls are going to close in the next 4 years because Amazon is sucking up another $20 billion in commerce every year, and just now it's tipping malls into oblivion. Same is true of Main Street stores. You might have seen some retail stores closing even here where you live, though this is a relatively prosperous area. So again, if that's the second most common job in the economy, what are all of the mall workers and retail workers going to do after the stores close? Food service and food prep. You've probably seen the self-serve kiosks in McDonald's. I used to love McDonald's as a kid. My parents fed me so much McDonald's and Chinese food. Those are like the two things. So if you feed your kids those things, they could be president. Don't worry about it. Don't get caught up in any of this like kid nutrition stuff. Just give them whatever. But McDonald's has already said they're going to have self-serve kiosks in every location in the United States by the next 3 years. So you can see that labor force shrinking. Truck driving is the one that freaks me out the most because there are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. It's the most common job in 29 states. The average truck driver is, well, 94% of truckers are male. Average age is 49. Average education is high school. So the stereotype you have of a truck driver, that's actually a truck driver. There is no other truck driver. It's a bunch of high school graduate men. And so if you see on the other side of the country, and many of you probably, how many of you all work in technology? Some of you, for sure. My friends, literally my friends in Silicon Valley are working on self-driving trucks, and they say they're 5 to 10 years away. So what are these 3.5 million truckers going to do when the trucks start driving themselves? This is like Trump to the 10th power. You think that Americans are mad now that we got rid of 4 million of their manufacturing jobs. When you start sending hundreds of thousands of truckers home, it's going to be violence, chaos, riots, and madness. I mean, a lot of these truckers are armed. There are 300 million firearms in this country, one for every man, woman, and child, essentially. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that's not us. It's not the people in this room don't own like a gun per person. So these are the trends that are coming up. And this is what I was seeing. I was staring at 2017, was like, oh my gosh, this country is heading towards a disastrous future unless we wake Americans up to the fact that it's not immigrants, it's technology that is getting rid of most of these jobs that Americans rely on. So I went to Washington, D.C. And talked to various leaders and said, look guys, we're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. The third inning has brought us Donald Trump. What is the plan to help America get to the fourth and fifth inning successfully and not end up with this very, very, very disastrous situation? And what do you all think senior officials in Washington, D.C. said to me when I presented them with this question? They said, I don't know. Pretty much, that's what they could have said. So the three responses I got were, 1, we cannot talk about that. 2, we should study that further. And 3, we must educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. Now the third sounds relatively competent, right? It's like, oh yeah, we should educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future. But then I said, look guys, I looked at the independent studies and how effective federally funded retraining programs are. Do you all want to guess how effective they are on a percentage basis? 10? 30? The range is 0 to 15%. Because it turns out retraining people is very, very hard. And oftentimes there's not a job waiting for them on the other side. And you're talking about people who might have worked in a manufacturing facility for a number of years, they have health problems, they haven't been to school in a long time. And so if you're an employer, are you going to hire that 50-year-old former manufacturing worker, or are you going to hire some 25-year-old community college graduate who probably wants less money? So the reality is that our retraining is more of a fantasy than a real solution. And so then when I said, hey guys, I looked at the independent studies, it turns out we're terrible at that. Then they say, well, that's my talking point, so I don't know what to tell you. Like, I guess we're going to get better at it. And I was like, yes, we're probably not going to get better at it. This meeting's terrible. So these are the responses I was getting from senior officials in Washington, D.C. And I had this sinking feeling coming back on the train from D.C. I was like, are we really that far gone as a society that our politicians can't even address the elephant in the room that's tearing these communities apart? And the answer is yes, we are that far gone. Our politicians are completely out to lunch. They do not understand technology at all. and they barely understand the economy. And so then when you're faced with this set of truths, you say, okay, how would we actually try and solve for this set of problems? Like, how can you wake Americans up? And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've created a multi-million-dollar organization out of just an idea I had. I've sold a company to a public company. So I said, you know what? We can take this case to the American people. We can create a wave, because most Americans are pretty smart. Like if you say, hey, you know what the problem is? The problem is we're about to automate away truck driving. Like 30% of your Main Street stores are about to close. We need to actually evolve as a people and an economy and a society. We have to start valuing ourselves in a way different than the market. Because the market will not care about cashiers and truckers and accountants and radiologists over time when AI can do those jobs. And so we need to start valuing ourselves intrinsically. So that is what I decided to run for president, is to make that case to the American people and solve these problems. And the big ways to solve the problems, one of you probably heard of is I want to give every American adult $1,000 a month, which would go so far to solve these problems, it is insane. Where right now, 57% of Americans can't pay an unexpected $500 bill. How many of you would agree with the sense that America is getting less reasonable and even less intelligent, like in this last several years? Anyone have that sense? Yeah. So if you look at the studies, you find that not being able to pay your bills decreases your functional intelligence by 13 IQ points, or almost 1 standard deviation. That's a ton. I mean, 1 standard deviation. So what we're doing is we're tipping more and more Americans into financial insecurity. They're not able to pay their bills, and then they get less reasonable, more impulsive, more susceptible to bad ideas. And if you go to them at that point and you say, hey, you don't need to worry about climate change, they say, like, I don't care about the penguins, like, get off my lawn, or whatever the heck it is. Like, that's where most Americans are. So you need to reverse that, bring $1,000 a month into their hands, and then their heads will come up, they will see that their future is assured, and then we can start solving some real problems. They can also start making more meaningful adjustments in terms of what the economy holds. The other big thing we need to do I think you'll like this, because you're all sophisticated, I sense, is that we need to start measuring economic value in different ways than GDP, which is a measurement that we made up almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression, when things were going very, very badly. And even the inventor of GDP said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being, and we should not use it as that. He also said we should include parenthood and motherhood in the calculation because it's so valuable. So one of the examples I use on the trail is I say, look, my wife is at home with our 2 young boys, 6 and 3, one of whom is on the autism spectrum. What does GDP value her work at? 0. What does the market value her work at? 0. But we know the work she's doing is some of the most important work there is, that it's more valuable, harder, contributing more to society than a hedge fund analyst or like a corporate lawyer. And so we need to start evolving our measurements, and also putting $1,000 into the hands of every adult would help balance the scales, and it would help compensate and reward women for the uncompensated, unrecognized work that women do every day in our society. So those are some of the big moves we need to make, and that is the plan to help America get through this incredible transition that we're in. Now, most politicians don't want to touch this because it seems really big and expensive and alarmist. But if you look at the numbers, we are here. Like, all of the negative signs you'd want to see are already here with us. 8 Americans are dying of drugs every hour. Our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, unheard of in a developed country, because of a surge in suicides among middle-aged Americans and drug deaths. Our labor force participation rate is at 63%, which is the same levels as El Salvador and the Dominican Republic, and 1 in 5 prime working age American men has not worked in the last year. There's like an army of men that are out of the workforce. All of the negative things you would expect to see happening if we were in the early stages of this displacement of labor, particularly unskilled male labor, they're right here. Like this is it. This is time. Donald Trump is the sign, and we need to grow up and evolve as a society as fast as possible. So that's why I'm running for president. I'm not running for president necessarily to be the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat, though I'm very, very proud of that. But I will say that my perspective on this is very much wedded to who I am as a person. Because my perspective, I'm going to suggest, is that of an Asian American entrepreneur who understands technology, understands the numbers, understands the impact it's having on communities, and most of our politicians are nowhere near that stuff. some of the leading politicians, no offense to anyone in this room, but they were born in the 1940s, and thus don't understand some of the things that are happening on the ground in Silicon Valley. So, my campaign, I just want to give a shout out to Zach, my campaign manager, who's recording me right now. Just want to give him a round of applause. So Zach saw many of the same things I saw. He left a high-paying Wall Street job to come be the campaign manager for Andrew Yang for president. To give you a sense of how that. He graduated from Duke University, has been working on Wall Street for a number of years, and then he saw the same things I saw, which is that the country is coming apart, and then no one's willing to talk about the real issues or problems. So the campaign, I'm glad to say, has been growing by leaps and bounds every single day, thanks to everyone, thanks to people like you here in this room. We raised almost $1 million to date. I was interviewed by Time Magazine. Freakonomics will both be coming out this month. CNN just included me in its last poll in Iowa, and I was the top choice of 1% of I was one of the top 2 choices of 1% of Iowans, which may or may not sound like a lot, but we were jumping for joy, because I'll tell you, if you think about what that means, that a significant number of Iowans said that guy should be president, like as a startup entrepreneur, I know that as soon as you have product market fit, you can grow from there. And so we were celebrating, one, that we were included in CNN's first national poll, and 2, that 1% of Iowans said Andrew Yang should be president at the same levels as Kirsten Gillibrand and Eric Holder, who've been national politicians for quite some time. So that is the why. The what, and this is what we're so grateful to you all in terms of contributing your time and resources and hopefully your enthusiasm, is that we have a genuine chance to change the course of history here for Asian Americans, for the country, over this next period. So one thing I said to the group at the junior high earlier, America is projected to become majority minority in 2045. It's 27 years from now. It's really fast, actually. Like, your kids are going to be adults and parents in a country that is majority non-white. Now, if you look at world history, unfortunately, when a population becomes more diverse, racism tends to go up, not down. Like, during this last period of Obama's presidency, there was this very positive